I'm doing very well, Mr. Dillahunty. How are you doing, Mr. Baker?
Good.
Well, I recently came through a few discussions. I actually watched a video from Matt Dillahunty several years ago in regards to the default position, in regards to the analogy of the gumball analogy. And I also saw an updated video you did, Matt, about
last month.
About 2000. What's that, sir?
I did one last month or so.
Yeah, and I noticed how well, there's also one you did in 2013 in relation to an updated discussion on how you were using a different analogy of guilty until proven innocent and that default position. But I've been seeing
there's an update to that one that I just released on my Patreon last month, which moves things out to the point of view of the district attorney, because it makes it a little easier to see whether or not the issue is whether or not we have sufficient evidence to bring charges to put before a jury.
Gotcha, sir. Well, there has been a number of theistic individuals I would quantify on YouTube, for example, that have made a different analogy in regards to the unwritten rule of baseball of the tie goes to the runner. And one of the main arguments I've been hearing some of these theists make is that if you have a default position, it's a form of cowardice because you choose not to pick one side or the other. And one of the issues.
Okay, then I'm a coward. Then I'm a coward, but I'm not going to fucking be wrong.
Absolutely. Well, the only reason why I wanted to ask your opinion on this, Mr. Dillahunty, and you, of course, Mr. Baker, is I came up with there's two analogies I came up with myself that kind of debunks, or that's a wrong word, or really is critical in regards to that analogy. And the first one that comes to my mind is we have police officers that are trained all the time in regards to how to react in regards to a dangerous situation in reference to using their weapons as a last resort in regards to that, and that's a default position. And it
sure doesn't seem that way lately.
I would agree with you, Mr. Dillahunty, but that's typically that's the expectation we would have among.
Sure. So what's the analogy?
Well, the analysis this is the analogy that a gentleman put out. He goes, suppose there's an umpire on a baseball game. It's the bottom of the ninth and it's the World Series. There are 2 outs and the score is tied. A ground ball is hit and the runner dashes to home plate. The shortstop initially fumbles the ball, but the third baseman picks it up and throws it to home. The catcher catches the ball while the runner slides into home plate. Now, there are some that are... Now, there is one thing sure that either the runner is either safe or out. The runner says that that he is safe, but he offers no proof. The catcher says that the runner's out and still offers no proof. The umpire, who is considered the atheist in this analogy,
simply
announces that he doesn't. Go ahead, sir.
Go ahead.
No, he simply announces he has no determination. And basically,
that's not the case. That's not remotely the case. I don't even have to know sports ball to know that this is not remotely the case.
Absolutely.
There is a rule that the tie goes to the runner. If the umpire is unable to make a call, basically you are safe until determined out. In the same way that you are innocent until proven guilty. But the fact that, let's say I'm not watching it, and nobody's looking. I'm the umpire, and I didn't see the play. Then the rules are such that I need to err on the side of innocence or safety. That does not mean that I'm convinced that the runner was actually safe. It means I'm acknowledging that the default position is that a tie goes to the runner. Maybe I blinked. Maybe I'm not sure. But in that case, as the umpire, because I'm in a game, I am forced to make a ruling. When it comes to the issue of whether or not there's a God, I am never forced to make up my mind. I have, in fact, tentatively made up my mind. Not only am I not convinced that there's a God, I'm convinced that there isn't a God for most normative definitions and anything that'd be useful. And I think that this little playing around with, we put the atheist in the position of the umpire, the analogy fails because I don't ever have to make a decision on God, and if I do, I can change my mind. Once the game's over, the umpire has no recourse to go and change his mind and say, you know what, I think in hindsight, that guy was actually out. The game's over. I don't have to make up my mind.
It's colorful and dramatic, though.
Yeah.
Well, see, one of the things that came to my mind in regards to my own analogy, other than the police officer, is if they're making that discussion and talking point in relation to a default position, couldn't that same supposition be applied to God as well? Because maybe I'm wrong here, but if you look at God, supposedly has this grand plan for everyone. He has a default position, which is his grand plan. So if his determination is having a default position as a form of cowardice, wouldn't that also be regarded toward God as well?
No. So this whole thing about, I don't know why this is so hard to explain the default position. The default position is not a default between two positions. It is a default position with respect to one position. The one proposition, some God exists, the default position is to not accept that until such time as there's sufficient evidence. And here's another proposition, no God exists. The default position is to not accept that until such time as the evidence warrants it. Going to the baseball, the runner is out. The default position is to not accept that until such time as the runner has been shown to be out. Oh, the runner is safe. Well, in baseball, the rules specifically say that the runner is safe until proven. It's a judgment call, and it is based on evidence. And so people are claiming that God is guilty of existing, and I'm sitting on a jury, and I can find God not guilty of existing without actually believing that God doesn't exist. In the same way that I can find somebody not guilty of murder and not think that they're completely innocent of this. The problem with all of these is that people try to view two mutually exclusive positions and say one of these two has to be the default position, and they're wrong. The default position is to reject both of those until such time as they're warranted, or you can still do the rules of baseball, have the tie goes to the runner thing, or I actually have to make a decision, like Don's going to flip a coin and he wants me to call it heads or tails. And I could sit here and say, well, I don't know which one it's going to be. I don't know which. Can I watch it first? Because that's what a skeptic would do. But at some point, the nature of this game is that I have to make a decision before that coin hits the table and lands. And even in that scenario, I can just refuse to play.
If I may ask Mr. Dillahunty your opinion on this, and again, I could be wrong here, but if someone had that position, wouldn't that also be
had what position?
Black and white have the position that there's only two choices?
They're wrong.
Wouldn't that be?
They are absolutely demonstrably moronically fucking wrong. It's really easy to demonstrate that I don't have to be convinced of either position. I do not have to be convinced that a God exists. I do not have to be convinced that no God exists. I can be in a position where I am not convinced of either of those.
Well, the only thing I was going to mention, Mr. Dillahunty, wouldn't that be considered a black and white fallacy in regards to the reasoning? I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that. Or a false dichotomy, like they view it as only one of two choices. I mean, isn't that considered a logical fallacy as well?
Well, yeah, sure. If they say there's only two positions when there's three, they're wrong.
Absolutely. I greatly appreciate your feedback on this, Mr. Dillahunty. That's the only question I had. So I do want to mention, in reference to the very first call you had from that gentleman from Australia, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness in the Millerite cult for 22 years.
Yeah.
And I wish I could have a conversation with that individual in regards to the multiple false predictions I've experienced firsthand in relation to that religious sect. So,
well, we do have a blog, and will be a posting for this show not too long after, and maybe the two of you can both meet up there and hash it out.
Definitely, sir. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Dillahunty, Mr. Baker, and thank you so much for your feedback, sir.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You guys have a great evening.
I feel old.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Mr. Baker, when you showed up here today, I wasn't sure that you would actually be able to do today's show.
All right.
Are you wearing your Depends?
A little slow, yeah. Need to get some suspenders or something.
And we have James.